Well, good morning and welcome to the How I Made It Through podcast. I'm Bernadette Thompson, and I have an amazing guest today. With me is Karen Hall, and she is a publicist, publisher, producer for Momentum Media. She is also the editor in chief of Global Women's Journal and Spanish Journal, which is partnered with the Los Angeles Tribune. She's an emotional intelligence leadership coach, and she's also the host of the Hero Within podcast. Karen is this amazing woman who supports other women in leadership and in growth. And I'm so grateful to have you with me because as we talk about how I made it through, there is just so much in everything that you've done. So welcome this morning.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate you, Bernadette. And I love what you are doing in the world. I love the way that you are supporting people who are grieving, and you have such an abundance mentality of supporting other women. I have felt your support. It has meant so much to me, and women who empower other women are like gold to me. It's like there's not that many of them, and it just you feel so safe, and you create that for people. So thank you for having me as a guest. I feel honored to be with you today.
Oh, thank you, Karen. Well, it is. I have followed you. I've watched you. I've followed you, and you have so many. As I sit here and read this bio, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I would love to know how how this all grew through you, and how you came to be doing all these things.
Well, thank you for asking. I haven't really told my whole story before, and so this is kind of new to tell it from this point of view because of the way that you asked the question. But so I wanted to be a writer ever since I was a little girl, and I also I was born as a premature baby, 2.5 months early. And so I had some trauma being in that incubator for 2.5 months by myself, when my mother couldn't hold me or touch me, couldn't nurse me, nothing. And so I came away from that with trauma and with some anxiety. And I had to learn through my life. It's been my life's journey learning how to regulate my nervous system. We didn't use those words back then, but I think writing was one of the ways that helped me. And when I learned about Laura Ingalls Wilder, when I read Little House on the Prairie, I love to read, and there were heroines in the books that I identified with, especially how they got through the thing. That was the thing that I was always fascinated by. And so I decided I wanted to be a writer. So when I was I think I was 9 or 10, I started writing, and then I wrote my first book when I was 11. And we didn't know how to publish books back then, so I didn't publish it or anything. But I was constantly writing. I wrote. And then I went into journalism in high school, and I was hired by the town newspaper to write, and I was an investigative reporter. And I also found that my favorite was doing feature interviews, and because I just love asking people questions and hearing their story. And so that was how I started publishing and getting into the journalism. And now I do interviews on broadcasts, and I actually produce the broadcast so that I can invite guests in, and I can create the framework, and I can ask them the questions that I think the audience can't wait to learn about. And it's so fun to be a producer, and it just thrills me to get to connect with the guests, because a lot of times I'm following people on social media and I'm like, oh, I want to pull the curtain back and I want to know more about them. And it makes me really happy when we can do that on a stage. And I love promoting people and helping them to grow what they are passionate about. So like with you, publishing your book, I'm so excited to have you speak and to be able to share that, so that the global audience that we have can be a part and celebrate you and know how to find you, and to be part of your audience as well. So then I was writing a book, and my book was on dealing with trauma, and I wouldn't use that word back then, but it was about basically how to get through things, and
Mhm.
it was called Dealing with Pain, and the next book was Healing with Pain, and I was interviewing people and asking them, how did they do it? How did they deal with this very difficult thing in their life? But once again, I didn't know how to publish it back then. We didn't have Amazon back then.
Yeah.
And then so I kind of shelved it for a while. And then podcasts started to become popular. And the thought came to me, I could interview people on my podcast because I don't know how to publish yet. And so I started a podcast, and then I learned how to publish. And so I started doing that. But that's how The Hero Within began, was because I wanted to make those stories available to everyone with no barriers, no cost. They could just tune in and listen whenever they wanted. And what shocked me was I didn't know how to advertise my podcast. And I was a one-man band. I didn't have sponsors or anything. But within just a couple months, I think it was 3 months, it went into the top 3% globally. And people all over the world were listening. And I could not believe the metrics, because I subscribed to a way to find out who was listening where and to see, because I wanted to, if it was in, Mexico, I wanted to make sure that I had Spanish things that were
Mhm.
available to them, or be able to translate or things. So I was amazed. Countries that I knew no one in were tuning in, and I realized, oh, this is resonating with people.
Mhm.
They're hungry to hear these stories of overcoming, and I think that that's why people resonate with you, is that there is a hunger. We are all going through a lot of challenges. So that's how, and then that led to the Los Angeles Tribune, and that led to the Global Women's Journal, and I had been an editor before, so it just was a fit, and I had already been doing broadcast myself, but now to produce it on a much larger scale, with hundreds and hundreds of speakers, was a new venture for me to be able to do that, and it took a lot of learning of technical things, but so much fun to meet so many people, and to meet the audience, to meet their audience, because their audience would engage, during the events, and so I was engaging, and then other times I would I didn't host the whole week-long events. Sometimes we had events that were 8 days long, and so sometimes I was the listener, as well. So I was the audience engaging with the speakers, on a different level. So it's just always so fun. I learned so much. I've grown so much, and that now I help other people to publish, and so it makes me so excited to see them hold that publication in their hands and see it, ABC, as seen on ABC. It just makes me so happy for them to have those moments of being elevated, where they are more visible and they can share their stories.
Karen, it is, you are so giving. Your personality is so giving. Like, let me help somebody else. Don't let me talk about me. Let me help somebody else. I'll tell you this much of my story, and then because you want to raise, and I want to take you back to understanding just a little bit, is the trauma, the fact that you came into this world in a trauma way, that you were almost lost, and that stayed with you,
Mhm.
that became an integral part of who you are. And so I would love for you to I think the question I want to ask is, as you've grown literally from the young child into a teenager and into, how did you kind of integrate that experience of being someone that had experienced trauma? And it sounds like it's always been a little bit of a focus for you.
Mhm.
I'm asking that for those who have had similar, really early childhood. Yours was infant childhood.
Right.
Um, Tell me a little about that.
Thank you for asking that question, because it took me years
Mhm.
to understand this. And because we weren't doing research on things like that back when I was a girl, my mom was always trying to help me to learn to overcome my fears and to deal with my anxiety. She was always my cheerleader, saying, you know, because I was terrified to speak in public, absolutely terrified. And she would say, she would tell me, well, why don't you go and I needed to earn money to pay for college. And so at 9 years old, I knew that I had to be able to earn money to pay for a car. I had to pay for my own college. And I was like, oh, I don't know, how am I going to earn money? And my mom said, well, your dad sold newspapers when he was a boy. Why don't you sell newspapers? I'm like, okay. But then I was like, oh, but I have to ask people if they want to buy a newspaper. And she said, well, let's practice. And so she would role play with me, and she was, bless her heart, she was so encouraging. So I still role play before I do things. I'll have my husband, okay, pretend you're the other person, or my kids, or whatever. I'll role play with people. But I had to really, really work. And so then when I got to high school, she said, why don't you take, a public speaking class? And I was like, me? No way. And she said, well, why don't you try out for drama? And I'm like, be on the stage. But I did it. And then she said, why don't you run for student body office? And I'm like, I don't think anybody would vote for me, but I did, and they did, and I became a leader. So I started my entrepreneurial journey really young, and I sold other things, not just newspapers. I went on to sell other things, and then when I got married, my husband and I turned that entrepreneurial vision into buying bankrupt businesses and turning those things around. And he said, you are in charge of marketing and sales. And I said, me? And I said, I don't know how I'm going to convince these people that I don't even know, because we'd moved to a new town. I said, I don't know how I'm going to convince them to bring us business when we're competing against these huge corporations. And he said, I have faith in you. Go. So then I learned a lot more. And then as I learned how to, we started talking about the nervous system and about mirror neurons. And I learned that I was a highly sensitive person, that there was a genetic DNA component. It wasn't just because of what I had gone through, that this was actually how I was wired, and that I was an empath. But then you add that on to the trauma. And then I learned about preverbal trauma and why it's so challenging, why my brain defaults to that fear instinct so easily, because I didn't have a way to process that. I didn't have any words. So being able to go through, that process, and having mentors that have helped me. I've had coaches that have helped me tremendously to work through that trauma, even just to be able to speak. That took a lot of coaching. and back then we didn't call it coaching, but I did have mentors that helped me. And now I can get up without an idea of what I'm going to say. I used to have to prepare everything and memorize everything. And I spoke for years, but I would always have notes that I could look down at. Well, then when I had to speak with a totally memorized speech, I was at an event in New York. It was like a TED Talk, but it was called Speak. And I couldn't, I was on stage. There was nothing, no teleprompter, nothing to look at. I was like, oh, this is big, and that caused me a lot of anxiety, but I just threw my notes away and just said, we're just going to do it. I know this stuff. I'm just going to talk from the heart. And that was an epiphany for me about how powerful, because I felt the connection with the audience. They, I could see their faces. I could see when they got emotional when I shared things. And then I recognized, even on broadcast, when I couldn't see the audience, I could feel when the audience would be drawn in, and when they did that with the guest, and I would be like, oh, let's go deeper there. And so all of those parts, my personality, I was able to utilize, but it took work to be able to, first of all, to even see it as a strength that I was so sensitive. That took years and years to see that as a strength, but then to also be able to regulate my nervous system so that I wasn't just focused on me and my fears. I could focus outward and say, what can I do for you? Because I didn't like being self-centered in those ways. I didn't like feeling the concern about my own pain, because I sometimes I describe it like being like a dog that curls up and licks their wounds. And that's how I felt. And I thought, this is really inhibiting me from being able to focus outward. And I love serving people. I love helping them. But when I'm in that mode, which is a grieving mode, and it took me a long time to understand that this is part of grieving. But when I understood grieving, and I could quickly recognize it and tell myself, oh, it's okay if you feel that way, Karen. you're just grieving. And then
Yeah.
have empathy for myself, then I was able to move through it and process it, and then I could come back and say, "I'm ready." You
Yeah.
know, I've healed from that moment. I understand it. I put it in perspective. I reframe it. I use humor a lot, and
Yeah.
then when I'm ready, then I'm able to continue on with my mission in life. So
Yeah.
that's been but the whole thing has been an incredible journey that has
Mhm.
been my journey. And when I realized I'm not the only one, just like you know that you're not the only one. And when I realized so many people wish they had mentors and coaches like I did, and I thought, oh well, I could help people just like people have helped me
Yeah.
with my story. And I could, if for some reason they resonate with my story, great. If they resonate with yours, awesome. But we can touch those people who are meant to hear our story.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of things that you said, the HSP, the highly sensitive person, and the empath. It is so, I share that, and the empathic, oh my goodness, it's just, you can't go anywhere without feeling everybody else. And what also resonates with your story is, this just moving forward and just saying, okay, I'm just going to try and do it. I mean, when David passed away, my husband, for those who are maybe listening for the first time, I lost my husband to alcoholism about 8 years ago, and I really had to reinvent myself, because we were just, everything had been centered about that, around that family, that I thought I was just going to grow up and be a grandmother, and which I am now, but um, but allowing myself to take those steps and just say, I can do it, even when I would then like go curl up in, you talk about curling up like a dog and licking your wounds, kind of. But, it's kind of like you'd put yourself out there, and then I'd have to go back and sit on the couch and say, and I can't look at that, but that when we are presented with whatever challenge that we have, and when I look back, I had lifelong challenges, not like yours, which would have been very, very challenging. But there's trauma affects all of us. And
Mhm.
so, hearing you talk about it and sharing how you came, it's like listening to you talk about how the flower opened up,
Yes.
so it brings me to the emotional intelligence leadership coach. Like, it makes me, I mean, I can understand just even with the title how this would have come into play, but I'd love to know about that a little bit.
Yes. So what started happening was, because I was doing sales, and we were having this exponential success, we were able to turn those bankrupt businesses around, not just because of me, but the sales part and the marketing part was very crucial, and it played an integral part. But other people that were afraid of sales saw that I wasn't, and they're like, aren't you afraid to?" Now I was still not, I was speaking on stage, but I still used notes at that point in time. But I was doing cold calls, and I loved it. I was like, this is so fun. I love to meet people. I would just go find out what they were doing and what I could do to serve them. And so when I realized that that was unique, I didn't think it was unique, but when I realized that it was unique, and other people that were in sales and marketing were terrified to go do cold calling. And I'm like, really? And so they started asking me, yeah, they started asking me, how do you do it? And so I started teaching them my system. I didn't realize I even had a system until they started asking me, and helping them. And then I would say, okay, well, let's talk about why you're afraid to go do that. What do you think about that person, that cold call, that contact, that whatever you're doing? And we talked about their motivation and their passions, and it
Mhm.
always came down to limiting beliefs. They always had a limiting belief, and many times they weren't aware of it. Sometimes they were, but we worked on grieving. We worked on healing from
Yes.
that thing that either someone said to them and they internalized, or that they believed. But it always was related to a wound from their past. Layer by layer by layer, we would get down to that. And they were always shocked that it had something to do with it. They just thought, oh, just teach me how to close the sale. I just need to know how to word it better so that I can overcome their objections. And I'm like, that's great to understand that part, but the deeper part is the energy that you bring to that moment. And then I started working with people that were in leadership positions in corporations and helping advise them about how to regulate their nervous system, because many times in the crisis they felt the energy from the thing that was happening that was scary, but they felt like they couldn't share that with their team, because then they'd be vulnerable and they'd look weak, and they were not able to connect. And many times their team didn't feel safe, and they didn't feel as connected, they didn't feel as engaged with their leader, and the leader was saying, what can I do to help move this forward? So I did a lot of coaching with CEOs of organizations. I was a chief relationship officer and for different corporations. And that just thrilled me to be able to sit down with the CEO. One person called me, "You're a CEO whisperer." Ooh, that's kind of a fun little phrase.
I know. I'd take that.
Yeah. And I didn't even always understand the specifics about their business. They would tell me those things, but that didn't matter. What mattered was the relationships. And what mattered was them having empathy for themselves first, for using emotional intelligence skills.
Yes.
And then co-regulating with their team so that their team felt safe and they could have those dialogues and those open communications, so that they had the engagement and they actually functioned as a team, instead of the dictator telling everybody what to do and the team saying, well, I'm going to go do this other thing over here and I'm not going to talk about it. And then there was the breakdown and the fracture. So that was how I began doing that. And then it combined with with the sales and marketing, because many times the leader was trying to engage their salesperson and help them to overcome things, and trying to model those things that they wanted their team members to do. So it was really fun and a big surprise. I always say that anybody in high school that tunes into my podcast or he sees me now would be like, we can't believe she's speaking out loud with a microphone.
Yeah.
And she's asking for it.
Well, it's, what you were just saying really resonated with me when you were talking about, in each of us. I don't think there is a person that exists on the planet that doesn't have that that hasn't had some type of trauma, doesn't have that inner voice that's telling them you can't. And sometimes they try and shout it out. Mm-hmm. They shout out so that they're not hearing the inner voice. And being able to work with somebody at a high level where you are helping them to go inside and just say, we all have this. Yeah. And when we begin with compassion and forgiveness for ourselves first, it helps us, and compassion and forgiveness for the fact that I feel unsure of myself. Right. That I feel like I can't do that I am, the Peter principle, like I shouldn't be in this position. I don't have those. And when you allow somebody to take this journey, when they take a journey, it kind of ties in when I help people go back and look at their ancestry and understand where they came from. People suddenly understand who they are, like a whole person. And, obviously somebody in leadership, ahead of a CEO, has to have some level of I'm in charge. Right. And they don't, and it's that fear of losing that unless they're yelling, unless they're yelling down the line, they feel like nobody's going to, if I talk softly, or, they may take advantage of me. They may figure, and so it's just such an interesting dynamic that personally we all go through as as you're sharing your story. And then as you're working with people, it is just like, yeah, I know how to do this because I already did this with myself.
Right. And I think it's very interesting. Many women deal with the imposter syndrome, but so do men. And that is, like you were just saying, the Peter principle and feeling like, do I even belong here? Many people feel that want to be. I work with speakers. I do speaker coaching, and I do, I coach people with publishing. And many people are afraid to put their voice out there, just like I was afraid to speak, but to speak so visibly and to have it's like I always, when I published my first book, I felt like it was my baby, like I was bringing this vulnerable little baby out, and just, I want everybody to be so happy and proud of my little baby, because it is work. It takes so much work, and overcoming even those limiting beliefs and that trauma. And the other thing that I found fascinating was that every person that up levels in whatever way it is, you set a goal to start exercising, whatever the up leveling is that you do, you always deal with resistance, and your brain wants to keep you safe. So it wants
Mhm.
you to play small and stay small. And it comes up with all kinds of reasons why it's a good idea not to do that goal.
Yeah.
And so that coaching of that regulating our nervous system works on the very universal aspect that every single person deals with. And ironically, most people don't even realize that that's happening. They they
Mhm.
just they just think, I'm just not good enough, or nobody wants to really hear what I have to say, or nobody would really follow me. But we're all leaders. We all
Yeah.
have a story that everyone,
Yeah.
everyone has a story, and there is someone out there that needs your story. So that's been a fascinating thing for me, to help these leaders realize they are not, absolutely not alone. This is not unique to them. And the thought process that they have is also universal. The actual words that they use may be different, but they're very similar to other
Mhm.
people. I mean, most of us say something like, I'm not good enough, or what I'm doing. Sometimes people don't say they'll say, this project isn't good enough, or,
Right.
my book isn't good enough to publish, or whatever. But it comes down to, I'm not good enough. So
Yeah.
that's been a very helpful thing, that I help people recognize that you are not a unicorn here.
Yeah.
Everybody that is wanting to up level, even those that don't, even those that stay on the couch, they're battling limiting
Oh,
too, you
absolutely.
know?
Yes. No, that is so true. And what's interesting is once you go through this process, in whatever way that you do, about going inside and understanding, all of the things that you've been through, the traumas, whatever in your lifetime. When you do that work and you start to come out on the other side, you recognize people who have also done that work.
Yes.
You're not afraid to be, the ones that are uncomfortable. And actually it makes you it almost wants you to draw them in because you want to help them. And I recognize that with you. And I think the two of us recognize that in each other. Um,
Yes.
and so when somebody begins to take that journey, they suddenly realize, wow, like I get it. And this confidence comes in. It doesn't always turn out into confidence where they can step out, but it's a little more confidence in that they know that they're, as you're talking about the nervous system,
Yeah.
that their nervous system is a little more regulated and they have a deeper understanding, compassion, forgiveness, everything for themselves.
Right. And what, one of the things that you just reminded me of, that is a very common thought that leaders have, and everybody has, when they're dealing with this barrier, whatever this obstacle is, this limiting belief, or whatever this thing is. And when they recognize something is off, they feel fear, or they feel anxiety, or they, whatever way they describe it, that's preventing them from moving forward. The thing that they come down to is, what's wrong with me?
Yeah.
What's wrong with me that I can't just get over that? What's wrong with me that I can't just courageously pick up the phone and make
Right.
that phone call? What's wrong with me that I'm afraid to speak? They don't always say those words, but that's what it comes down to, because they don't know that
Hmm.
that's their amygdala taking over, and that they don't have the resources to come to their prefrontal cortex, where they can be creative, and they haven't learned how to have empathy for themselves, so that they can forgive themselves and show themselves love, to move through the grieving process. So there's nothing wrong with them. There
Right.
is there just is sometimes a gap in the understanding, and in the ability to first understand how important compassion is for themselves, and then second, learn how to be compassionate. We don't teach that. And
Oh,
I'm so grateful you were teaching that, and you were mentioning how you teach that to youth. And I've done that with my coaching. Parents come to me and say, help my children. They're scared. They have anxiety. Teach them emotional intelligence. And I'm like, did you know that we need to work together so that you can learn it too?
Yeah.
Because you are going to role model it far longer than I am. And so I work with families, and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But we don't learn that as a youth. Now they are teaching that, in schools too.
Yeah, they're definitely teaching it more in school. I know
Not when we were young.
and it was, I worked with kids. It was an alternative team. So we were teaching this little alternative team, but they weren't being taught that out in the main, field very much. But I also wanted, so as we're going around the clock, because you know how that clock goes so quickly.
Yes.
I would love to talk about how you began the Global Women's Journal and the Spanish Journal. Tell me about how that because I know it's connected to women that have are now coming out as leaders after going through the process of the the emotional intelligence work. How did that all come about?
Right. So it was similar because of the podcast, the leaders at the Los Angeles Tribune explained to me that they had listened to my podcast and they appreciated the interviews that I did and how I drew out and had these stories, these guests told these amazing stories. And so they wanted to provide more platforms for women. And Mo Rock is the CEO of the Los Angeles Tribune. And he said, when you look around at all of the podcasts, about 85% are men. And when you look at the stages, same thing, almost all men, very few women. And he said, I want to make more stages for women. I want to make more platforms where women can speak, where they can write, where they can share their story. And so I was, I had that same vision myself. So it just was this perfect match for providing women in the broadcast to speak and then to publish their story. And so this picture that is with the blonde-haired woman is our recent issue. Let's see, maybe I'll show it to you here. There it is.
Nice.
And this is Becky Robbins, and she was the co-founder of Robbins Research International. Amazing story that she tells. And so now I have the privilege of being able to curate those stories and then to publish them. And then the Latin Journal was because they are very underrepresented. So not only are women underrepresented, but the Latin population is very underrepresented, and they have incredible stories of overcoming. And so we felt like that was a platform that we wanted to give them as well. So that's just launching. It's still a startup, but I have so many people that are so excited they can't wait to be a part of that. And we have had some of them already speak at events, and oh my goodness, hearing their stories I love overcoming stories. It just thrills me to no end. So that those two platforms specifically totally resonated with me. I happen to love the Hispanic culture. My husband says I should have either been born into the Hispanic culture or the Italian culture. He said, because first of all, you can't talk without your hands. And he said, and you love to hug people and kiss them on the cheek. And so when I meet those people, and I've been to Guatemala and to Mexico and to Chile, I've been to Peru, several different Latin American countries. I just fall in love with the people. And I love how they hug and kiss and they welcome you with the warmest embrace. And I feel so loved. And so I wanted to give back, to them and to provide a
That's interesting because I have had quite a few Spanish, Latin American women who have come to me as clients, and the ancestral trip that we take, it's the indigenous, it's all about the indigenous cultures that they come from, and as you said, the indigenous people were pushed out, during, and so there's still this underlying thing that I don't want to let people know I come from that culture. And I'm like, let's bring that. It's such a beautiful, and that's where I really love helping and being with women who are shying away from who they are. because they were always told that, oh no, if you came from that culture, that you were, so I love that's part of your your journey as well.
Yes. And speaking of indigenous cultures, I worked on, so I'm in Arizona, and I worked on the Fort Apache Native American, it's the White Mountain Apache Reservation. And I also worked on the Navajo Reservation. And so we're very close to the reservation where I live. And so I worked with the youth, I worked with the families, I worked there it's a volunteer position. It was like a ministry for me. And I did that for about 10 years, and amazing to see the growth in those individuals. And my love for them was just like the Hispanic people. They're like my family. I just absolutely adored them. And it was very interesting to begin that process because of the distrust that was involved, and to build trust and how important trust was. And I learned so much about meeting someone where they were, and about allowing them to take the first step, and to just be ready when they were ready. And they did, and they were just, once you make a friend of, I found that, once you make a friend of a Native American, you're friends for life. They just love you so much. And
yeah. Well, I'm also, just feeling just the beautiful emotion of, all of the work, that you do. It is, it's one of those things that we, when we talk about how I made it through, how people have been through, so many difficult times. And what I love about the story that you're sharing is that, there's all different ways that we, as we begin to open up, that when we reach out to others and understand the struggles other people have had and what other people have gone through, it softens what we're going through.
yes,
And that's really because we all, I work with a lot of people when we go back into their ancestry or into their intergenerational trauma or ancestral, and everybody thinks that they're in isolation, that they're, and so what this conversation is bringing up for me is just how open it is. And then I also want to bring a little bit in about the spiritual side, because I work, my work takes people on the spiritual side of, you're bringing it up with the indigenous and the, that we are of the earth, and it's like, as as above, so below, that there is this very spiritual connection that we all have. And as we begin to understand who we are, we often begin to understand the spiritual being that we are inside of us.
yes. Oh, yes, absolutely. So I didn't say this before when you asked about my journey, but one of the things that made a huge difference in my journey was Marianne Williamson. And so I trained with her as a spiritual life coach. I had read her books, absolutely love her writing, and hearing her voice and the way that she describes things. And then to have the privilege of getting to talk to her directly one-on-one, and to be trained in her model of spiritual coaching was very powerful. And I realized that every single person that I talked to, that I was coaching with, we were talking about spiritual things. We always went to talking about spiritual things because I always reminded them of their divine identity.
Yeah.
And they were a spiritual being. And Marianne Williamson's book, Return to Love, was so powerful in shifting my paradigm and my view, that then I was able to teach that, just like you said, that I am a being of love. And if I am a being of love, then I act different and I see things different. And if I see you as a being of love, then that changes things too. So say you're behaving in an unloving way, but I know that you're a being of love, then I think, oh, this being of love just has an unmet need there. And it allows me to have that compassion for you. And if I'm acting in an unloving way, and I remember, oh, I'm a being of love, I can forgive myself and say, I just forgot that I was a being of love too.
Mhm.
So
Well,
that's,
yeah, and sometimes it's just like we go back to what was programmed in us.
yes.
I came from this large family, and so there was just patterns of behavior that were, how you turned around and said something, what I those things, and you have to release some of those things that you
Mhm.
learned. But understanding how, when I went through my transformation and the loss of my husband, my ancestors came to me, and it was this beautiful. I mean, they came to me. They let me know that they were here and that I was not alone. And that when I understood, oh my goodness, that we are really connected,
Yes.
and that there is no, and we feel like it. We always go up, like it's
Yeah.
up,
Like
but
it's far away, but it's not.
it's not. And and it is, and I hear in your journey, some of what my journey has been like, that as we go through all of these things, that really what we're doing is just getting closer, and like, oh my goodness, this is who I came in to be. this
Yes.
is this is who I was, who, when I was on the other side saying, okay, I often explain to people that there is, we have a palette of colors, and when we're coming into this lifetime, for those that believe that we have more than one lifetime, that we're kind of saying, okay, what shade of something have we not experienced yet? And so when we come in, that we come in with these challenges,
Mhm.
and then just as we go through what we've been going through, and the more we learn in each time, that we know that it's all from as a center of love, but also just that it is us as spiritual beings that are connected, and that are here doing what. Yep, I'm doing it. See, I got it.
Yes. Yes. I talk about our mission and our calling and what we were sent here to do. And I remember I read this quote, and I think it was Mark Twain. I can't remember, but he said the most important day of your life is figuring out why you're here, and the second most important thing is figuring out how to do it, or something like that. I can't remember the exact quote, but
Yeah.
that was so true. And my ancestors have come to me too, and so that is such a spiritual experience and so profound. I mean, they have changed my paradigms as well, where I saw something in the wrong way for so long, and they said, honey, listen, I experienced that too, and let me tell you the true way to look at it. I was like, oh, oh my word,
Everything. Yeah.
changed everything. And I realized that I was suffering unnecessarily because I had that limiting belief and that false thought.
Mhm.
And when I was able to change that thinking, I was liberated, and I had so much more joy in my life.
Yeah. And so it is, it's just, that is just so important. What you just said is, uh, just understanding. I can't even, it's like I don't even have words.
Oh, you are such a beautiful soul, Bernadette. I'm so grateful for you, and I'm so proud of you, so happy for you, publishing your book and having your podcast and the work that you are doing, because you are changing lives and you are helping people to heal so that they can move forward, so that they can do what they were sent here to do, because we each have unique gifts that we are here to use. But when we're in pain, like I mentioned, it's very hard, and that thwarts us in our abilities. So when we do that inner work and we receive that help to heal from the other side, from a mortal, from our divine creator, then we are able to move forward. And the interesting thing that I found as well, that was such a profound thought, because I often have felt like I'm behind and I should have learned this sooner,
Mhm.
now I've learned it, so I should always be able to apply it. But when I have been harsh in my judgment with myself about those things, like how long it took me to learn to regulate my nervous system, I then came to the thought that actually that's pretty good, because now I have authenticity to help other people that are struggling, and
Yeah.
I can speak on a different level than if I just learned coaching skills. There are people that are really good at coaching, but they might not have the same ability to empathize with how painful it is to go through the length of time to process it and that journey.
Yeah.
So I realized that that experience gave me greater empathy in general, but specifically for learning those tools. And so I had to totally reframe that.
Yeah. That is such a beautiful way to, I think, to wrap this up, because I think that's the message that we want to leave with them, leave with our listeners, is that, yeah, we are always harsher on ourselves.
Yes.
And I love the fact that, we're able to teach from a place of, I've been there. You want me to show you the movie?
Exactly. I can relate.
Yeah. And that we also always, I still often jump back, I don't, I come right back out, but there are those moments that it's like,
Yes.
and so, I just think this is such a great conversation. But I'd
Thank-
love for you to share what would be your parting thoughts, or how you'd like people to reach out to you, or what would you like to leave us with?
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Bernadette. I love it when people connect with me. Connection is so important. I think as I was deprived of it from those 2.5 months, it is like air for me. So I absolutely love connecting with people. You can connect through that QR code. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. That's a really easy way. Just send me a message. There's a lot of Karen Halls. So my clients have dubbed me Karen Hall, the Queen of Empathy. So that's what I put on LinkedIn, because my clients use that term all the time. It's a
Yeah.
little audacious to say, but they said, that's what you do. So that's your identity. I'm like, okay, great. So I stuck it on there. But you know, they're welcome to reach out in that way. And I would love to hear their story. I would love to help promote them and give them opportunities to share their story as well. And so I just want to thank you, because first of all, I feel so honored that you are so interested in my story. That
Mm.
touches my heart, that you want to know. When someone cares and they're interested in my story, I feel like $1,000,000. And so you have blessed me not only to feel like $1,000,000, but you have blessed me to go back and reflect on my life and celebrate my journey, celebrate every part of my journey. I just did that with you. And so my heart is so filled with joy. And that's why I get emotional, because I'm remembering those spiritual experiences that taught me, the mentors that guided me, the growth that I have experienced in my life. I'm a grandma too, and now I have taught my children. Now I'm teaching my grandchildren, because I want them to learn these things quicker than I did, and that's the most important audience that I have. But I love my listeners as well, and I want to help them learn the things that I learned, so that they don't have to suffer the way that I did. And
Mm.
that is my mission. That is my mission in life.
Oh, well, Karen, I'm going to leave it there. That is just beautiful. Thank you so much. And thank you for my listeners who are listening, because I know you have many choices. And I look forward for them coming back for another episode, another podcast of How I Made It Through.
Yes, and I want to give your listeners hope that they can make it through. We made it through. And when you hear stories like Bernadette's guest, you gain hope, because you know, I can make it through too. She did it. He did it. I can do it. And you can do it too.
Mm. Thank you.